A theatre manager in London was so broke he pawned his wife's jewelry to buy food. When he died, critics called his vampire novel a failure. Today, that failed book has made more money than almost any story ever written and created a monster so powerful that every vampire movie, TV show, and book is still copying his formula, 127 years later. Bram Stoker died in 1912, believing his supernatural thriller, Dracula, was a commercial disaster. But by 2025, his creation has become something far more valuable than he could have imagined. Every vampire story since, from Anne Rice's elegant aristocrats to the sparkling romantics of Twilight, exists in conversation with Stoker's template. He didn't just write a horror novel, he invented the blueprint for how we understand seductive manipulation, whether it's vampires on screen or predators on dating apps. The parallels between Dracula's methods and modern digital manipulation are chilling. Count Dracula was a master of gaining intimate access to victims, studying their habits, exploiting their vulnerabilities, and slowly corrupting them through repeated contact. Sound familiar? In our hyper-connected world of social media algorithms and online predators, Stoker's 1897 Vampire reads like a handbook for psychological manipulation in the digital age. Consider how Dracula operates. He creates multiple fake identities to purchase properties across London, establishes trust through charm and gifts, isolates victims from their support networks, and gradually escalates control. Today's romance scammers follow an identical playbook: fake profiles, love bombing with attention and gifts, creating dependency, then exploitation. Dating apps have become hunting grounds for predators who study profiles like Dracula studied his victims' routines, crafting the perfect approach for each target. Social media algorithms mirror Dracula's vampiric influence in disturbing ways. Just as the Count could mentally influence his victims from a distance, platforms track our digital behavior to feed us content that keeps us scrolling, gradually reshaping our thoughts and desires. The vampire's bite created an addictive craving for his presence. Social media notifications trigger the same dopamine responses, making us crave validation from strangers who may not even be real. When Dracula was published, society was grappling with fears that mirror our own contamination, foreign influence, and the breakdown of traditional protections. Stoker's vampire embodied the terror of something infectious that could spread through intimate contact, transforming the pure into something monstrous. In 2025, after experiencing a global pandemic and watching misinformation spread like a virus through social networks, these fears feel remarkably current. The contamination metaphor runs deeper than physical disease. Dracula's corruption spreads through what Stoker presents as intimate exchange blood, the essence of life itself. Victims don't just die, they're transformed into something that spreads the same corruption to others. This mirrors how conspiracy theories and extremist ideologies spread online today. People don't just consume misinformation, they become active spreaders, recruiting others into the same distorted worldview. The vampire's bite becomes a metaphor for how toxic ideas infect communities, turning victims into vectors. Bram Stoker was an unlikely creator of horror's most enduring predator. Born in Dublin in 1847, he spent his career managing the Lyceum Theatre in London, working under the legendary actor Henry Irving. Irving was a dominating, charismatic figure who demanded absolute loyalty traits that would echo in Count Dracula's relationship with his servants. But Stoker's real genius came from understanding that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who seem charming at first. Irving's influence on Dracula's character cannot be overstated. The famous actor was known for his magnetic stage presence and his ability to command absolute devotion from his company. He was also notoriously demanding, expecting his staff to sacrifice their personal lives for his artistic vision. Stoker spent decades catering to Irving's every whim, managing not just the theatre, but the actor's entire public image. Some scholars suggest that Stoker channeled his complicated feelings about this relationship into Count Dracula, creating a character who possessed Irving's charisma but used it for explicitly evil purposes. The financial pressure Stoker faced while writing Dracula was crushing. Theatre management was precarious work, dependent on box office success and Irving's increasingly erratic behavior. Stoker's family often struggled to make ends meet, and he wrote much of Dracula during evenings after long days at the theatre. The irony that this book, written during his most financially desperate period, would eventually generate billions in revenue, makes his story even more poignant. If you're enjoying this deep dive into how one broke theatre manager created the template for modern psychological horror, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the stories that still shape our world. What makes Stoker's achievement extraordinary is that he created literature's most convincing supernatural threat without ever visiting Transylvania. Through meticulous research at the British Museum and London Library, he built a landscape that felt authentic to readers who couldn't verify its accuracy. He drew inspiration from Vlad the Impaler, a 15th-century Romanian prince known for brutal executions, but transformed this historical monster into something psychologically complex, a predator who studies his victims before striking. Stoker's research process was obsessively thorough. He spent 7 years gathering material, reading everything from medieval histories to contemporary travel guides. He interviewed Eastern European immigrants in London, learning about folklore and customs. He studied maps so carefully that when scholars finally visited the regions he described, they found his geographical details remarkably accurate. The famous castle location, perched on a rocky precipice above a winding river, was composite, drawn from multiple real fortresses he'd researched. The historical Vlad Dracula was a 15th-century Wallachian prince who earned the nickname Vlad the Impaler for his preferred method of execution. He would impale enemies on wooden stakes and leave them to die slowly as a warning to others. While this provided the name and basic vampire folklore connection, Stoker transformed Vlad from a straightforward tyrant into something far more psychologically sophisticated. Where the historical figure used brute terror, Stoker's count employs seduction, manipulation, and calculated psychological warfare. Specific scenes came from Stoker's own observations. The famous shipwreck sequence, where Dracula arrives in England, was inspired by an actual wreck Stoker witnessed in Whitby. He combined real maritime disaster with vampire folklore, creating something that felt both supernatural and grounded in reality. This technique, anchoring impossible events in recognizable details, would become standard for horror storytelling. The Whitby sequence demonstrates Stoker's genius for blending fact with fiction. During a seaside vacation, he witnessed the actual wreck of a Russian ship called the Dmitri, which ran aground during a fierce storm. Local newspapers covered the event extensively, and Stoker collected these clippings, later incorporating actual newspaper reports into his novel. The Gothic setting of Whitby, with its ancient abbey ruins and clifftop cemetery, provided the perfect atmospheric backdrop for Dracula's dramatic arrival in England. Stoker also drew inspiration from a real London location, the suicide burial ground at the crossroads near what is now King's Cross Station. Victorian London was full of such macabre locations, and Stoker used his intimate knowledge of the city to create a sense of supernatural threat lurking just beneath the surface of everyday urban life. This technique of hiding horror in familiar settings would become a hallmark of modern supernatural fiction. Stoker's personal struggles shaped his creation in profound ways. Sickly as a child, he understood vulnerability and the fear of physical weakness. His work in the theatrical world, often viewed with suspicion by conventional Victorian society, gave him insight into outsider status and the masks people wear in public versus private. The childhood illness aspect is particularly significant. Stoker was bedridden for much of his early years, with an undiagnosed condition that left him weak and dependent on others. This experience of physical helplessness, of being trapped in his own body while his mind remained active, clearly influenced his portrayal of Dracula's victims' characters who become prisoners in their own transformed bodies, aware of their condition but unable to resist their new nature. His recovery and subsequent physical transformation also shaped the novel. As a young adult, Stoker became remarkably athletic, excelling at football and athletics at Trinity College Dublin. This dramatic personal change from weakness to strength gave him insight into the psychology of physical transformation that pervades Dracula, the idea that our bodies can betray us, but also that radical change is possible. Count Dracula himself revolutionized fictional monsters. Previous vampire stories featured obviously monstrous creatures, corpse-like, repulsive, clearly evil. Stoker's Count was seductive, intelligent, possessed of dark charisma that made his evil appealing rather than simply frightening. He could be charming dinner company before revealing his true nature, making him far more dangerous than traditional monsters. Today's most effective online manipulators follow the same pattern: initial charm, masking predatory intent. The genius of Stoker's Dracula lies in his sophistication. When Jonathan Harker first meets the Count, he's impressed by his host's knowledge, refinement, and apparent concern for his guests' comfort. Dracula speaks multiple languages, displays extensive knowledge of English law and customs, and presents himself as an educated nobleman. This makes the gradual revelation of his true nature far more disturbing than if he had been obviously monstrous from the start. This sophisticated predator model has become the template for modern villains across all media. From Hannibal Lecter's cultured cannibalism to the charming psychopaths of contemporary thrillers, writers learned from Stoker that the most terrifying monsters are those who can blend seamlessly into civilized society. The vampire's ability to appear normal, even attractive, while harboring monstrous appetites, speaks to fundamental fears about deception and hidden evil that remain relevant in our age of online personas and digital masks. Van Helsing became the prototype for the expert guide who helps ordinary people through supernatural crises. His combination of scientific rationality and openness to supernatural explanations created a character type that appears in countless horror stories: the mentor who bridges everyday reality and the realm of monsters. Modern paranormal investigators, TV demon hunters, and even conspiracy theory experts all follow Van Helsing's template. Van Helsing's character was revolutionary because he represented the union of modern scientific thinking with ancient wisdom. He uses the latest medical technology alongside traditional folklore remedies, approaching the vampire threat with both empirical observation and supernatural knowledge. This balance made him credible to Victorian readers who were grappling with rapid scientific advancement while still holding on to religious and folkloric beliefs. The character also established the knowledgeable outsider archetype, the expert who arrives to help local people understand a threat they can't comprehend alone. This pattern appears in everything from monster movies to modern procedural television, where specialists arrive to explain and combat unusual threats. Van Helsing's combination of academic credentials with practical experience fighting evil became the template for countless similar characters. Mina Harker represented Stoker's vision of someone who could resist corruption through intelligence and moral strength. She possesses organizational skills and courage, yet channels these qualities toward conventional goals. Her ability to maintain goodness even while mentally connected to Dracula demonstrated that virtue could overcome corruption, but only through individual strength combined with community support. In our age of online harassment and digital stalking, Mina's combination of vulnerability and resilience feels remarkably modern. Mina's character was groundbreaking because she embodied both traditional feminine virtues and modern capabilities without being punished for her intelligence and independence. Unlike Lucy, who becomes corrupted partially because of her openness to multiple suitors and her more sensual nature, Mina maintains her moral center while actively participating in the vampire hunt. She operates the typewriter, organizes the group's research, and even allows herself to be used as a psychic link to track Dracula. This balance made her a template for modern heroines, who must be both capable and relatable, both independent and connected to others. Contemporary female characters in supernatural fiction often follow Mina's pattern: intelligent, resourceful, morally centered, but willing to make personal sacrifices for the greater good. Her ability to maintain her essential self, even while contaminated by evil contact, speaks to contemporary concerns about maintaining identity and integrity in corrupting environments. Renfield established the archetype of the devoted servant, whose relationship with power reveals uncomfortable truths about loyalty and obsession. His consumption of insects and small animals, progressing up the food chain, hoping to gain life force, created a character whose madness follows twisted logic. Today's influencer culture and parasocial relationships echo Renfield's desperate hunger for connection with someone more powerful. Renfield's zooophagus madness, his systematic consumption of living creatures to absorb their life force, represents one of literature's most disturbing portrayals of obsessive devotion. His belief that by serving Dracula and consuming life in increasingly larger quantities, he will eventually gain immortality, reflects a corrupted version of religious devotion and sacrifice. The scene where he releases thousands of flies in his asylum cell, then eats them along with the spiders that come to feed on them, remains one of the novel's most viscerally disturbing moments. Modern parasocial relationships, where fans develop one-sided emotional connections with celebrities or influencers, mirror Renfield's dynamic with Dracula. People who spend their life savings on donations to streamers, who rearrange their schedules around content creators' posts, who defend public figures against all criticism despite never having met them, all echo Renfield's desperate hope that devotion will be rewarded with recognition and elevation. Stoker's storytelling technique proved as influential as his characters. His use of multiple perspectives through letters, diary entries, and newspaper clippings created unprecedented authenticity for supernatural narrative. This approach allowed readers to experience events through different eyes while maintaining mystery through incomplete information. The technique built suspense by fragmenting the story, forcing readers to piece together truth alongside the characters. The epistolary format was particularly brilliant because it solved the credibility problem that supernatural fiction faces. By presenting events as documents, personal letters, diary entries, medical reports, newspaper articles, Stoker made readers feel like investigators examining real evidence rather than passive consumers of an obviously fictional story. Each document type brought its own narrative voice and perspective, creating a rich, multi-layered account that felt more convincing than any single narrator could have achieved. This technique also allowed Stoker to control information flow with surgical precision. Readers learn about Dracula's powers gradually through different characters' observations and experiences. Jonathan Harker's diary reveals the Count's supernatural abilities. Mina's letters show his psychological manipulation tactics. Newspaper reports document his arrival in England, and medical records track his victims' physical and mental deterioration. This fragmented revelation builds suspense far more effectively than straightforward chronological narration. This documentary-style approach influenced everything from found-footage horror films to modern true crime podcasts. By presenting his story as real documents, Stoker made the impossible seem possible, grounding fantastic events in mundane details readers could relate to. Modern social media horror follows the same pattern: ordinary posts and messages that gradually reveal something terrifying underneath. Contemporary found-footage films like The Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, and Cloverfield all follow Stoker's template of using supposedly authentic documentation to create supernatural credibility. True crime podcasts use similar techniques, presenting evidence through recordings, interviews, and documents to build suspense and engagement. Social media horror stories like viral Twitter threads that start normally and gradually reveal something sinister directly descend from Stoker's epistolary innovation. Stoker also pioneered the template for investigation narratives. The pattern of mysterious threat, investigation, growing understanding, initial defeat, regrouping, and final confrontation became the blueprint for everything from Sherlock Holmes to modern paranormal procedurals. This structure works because it mirrors how we actually process real threats. Denial, investigation, understanding, preparation, action. The investigative structure was revolutionary because it made readers active participants rather than passive observers. Like the characters, readers must analyze clues, connect evidence, and gradually understand the nature of the threat. This engagement creates investment and suspense that purely action-based narratives can't match. The slow revelation that Dracula is systematically purchasing properties across London, creating safe houses for his expansion into England, builds dread more effectively than straightforward monster attacks. Dracula's cultural evolution reveals how each generation projects its fears onto the character. 1920s stage adaptations emphasized Gothic romance. Bela Lugosi's 1931 performance created the suave aristocrat that dominated popular culture for decades. Later interpretations explored Dracula as tragic romantic hero, sexual liberation symbol, disease metaphor, and predatory capitalist. Each version reflects contemporary anxieties while maintaining Stoker's core insight about seductive evil. The 1920s stage version, starring Bela Lugosi years before his film career, transformed Dracula from Stoker's more monstrous figure into a romantic lead. This adaptation, written by Hamilton Dean and John Balderston, emphasized the Count's aristocratic charm and tragic isolation, reflecting the post-World War I fascination with doomed romantic figures. The play was enormously successful, running for years and establishing many of the visual and character elements we now consider iconic. Lugosi's 1931 film performance cemented the image of Dracula as elegant predator rather than monstrous creature. His Hungarian accent, formal evening wear, and hypnotic stare created a template that influenced vampire portrayals for decades. The film reflected Depression-era anxieties about foreign influence and economic predation, with Dracula's wealth and aristocratic bearing contrasting sharply with the struggling middle-class protagonists. The 1950s and 1960s saw Hammer Film Productions reimagine Dracula through Christopher Lee's more physical, overtly sexual interpretation. These films reflected changing attitudes toward sexuality and authority, presenting a more explicitly violent and sensual vampire that matched the era's growing frankness about previously taboo subjects. Lee's Dracula was less charming but more primal, reflecting post-war skepticism about civilized facades. Take a moment to share this video with anyone who wants to understand how stories from over a century ago still explain modern predators and manipulation tactics. The financial irony of Stoker's legacy remains literature's most striking example of posthumous vindication. He sold few copies during his lifetime and died believing he'd written a commercial failure. His widow struggled financially for years, fighting to protect copyright while seeing minimal income. Yet, Dracula has generated more revenue through adaptations and merchandise than almost any fictional character, appearing in thousands of films, shows, and books, while launching entire entertainment industries. The numbers are staggering when you consider the scope of Dracula's commercial impact. The character has appeared in over 200 films, more than any other fictional character except Sherlock Holmes. Television appearances number in the hundreds, from children's cartoons to serious dramatic series. Universal Studios alone made hundreds of millions from their classic monster films featuring Dracula, beginning with the Day 1931 Lugosi version. Modern estimates suggest that Dracula-related media has generated over $10 billion in revenue across all formats and platforms. This transformation from failure to phenomenon reflects the novel's remarkable adaptability. Stoker created characters specific enough to feel real, yet universal enough to accommodate endless reinterpretation. His vampire could represent aristocratic decadence, foreign threat, sexual predator, tragic figure, or corporate overlord, depending on what each generation needed to explore. The influence extends far beyond vampire fiction. Stoker's template for supernatural investigation, his balance of scientific rationality with supernatural acceptance, and his technique of building suspense through fragmented information became standard elements in horror and supernatural fiction. Modern paranormal shows, urban fantasy novels, and supernatural procedural television series all follow patterns Stoker established. Contemporary television series like Supernatural, The X-Files, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and countless others all use Stoker's basic formula. Ordinary people discover supernatural threats, seek expert guidance, gather information through investigation, and confront evil through a combination of traditional weapons and modern techniques. The team dynamic he established, the expert, the innocent, the skeptic who becomes a believer, appears in virtually every paranormal investigation narrative. Remarkably, Dracula achieved this influence while maintaining essential readability and entertainment value. Unlike works that prove influential primarily among scholars, Stoker's novel continues finding new readers who discover it as thrilling story first, literary landmark second. The characters remain compelling, the atmosphere creates genuine unease, and central conflicts between tradition and modernity, purity and corruption, individual desire and social responsibility continue resonating. The novel's exploration of technology proved remarkably prescient. Stoker wrote during early recorded sound, rapid transportation, and telegraphic communication, incorporating these innovations in ways that demonstrated both promise and danger. Characters use modern technology to hunt ancient evil, establishing dynamics central to supernatural fiction, tension between old threats and new methods of confronting them. Today's AI anxiety and digital privacy concerns echo the same themes. This dynamic between ancient evil and modern technology has become central to supernatural fiction. From H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horrors confronting industrial civilization to contemporary stories about demons in computer networks, writers continue exploring Stoker's insight that technological progress doesn't eliminate fundamental threats. It simply changes how those threats manifest and how we combat them. Don't forget to leave a comment below about your favorite vampire story or adaptation, and let us know which classic book you'd like us to explore next. Stoker's treatment of corruption through Renfield's character proved influential in establishing how fiction approaches supernatural contact and mental transformation. Renfield's madness follows its own logic, suggesting exposure to supernatural forces doesn't simply drive people insane, but transforms reasoning in specific, almost coherent ways. This approach influenced countless works exploring psychological effects of encountering the impossible, from cosmic horror to modern conspiracy thrillers. The portrayal of madness as transformation, rather than simple breakdown, became a template for later horror writers. H.P. Lovecraft's protagonists don't just go insane when confronting cosmic truths. They develop new forms of perception that reveal disturbing realities hidden from ordinary consciousness. Modern psychological thrillers often follow this pattern, showing characters whose apparent mental illness might actually be a form of supernatural or paranormal sensitivity. Stoker died in 1912, never knowing he'd created a character who would become virtually immortal in popular culture. The man who spent his career in shadows, managing other people's theatrical triumphs, had unknowingly written himself into literary history. His vampire count, born from Victorian anxieties and shaped by Irish theatrical sensibilities, transcended its original context to become a universal symbol of seduction, corruption, and the eternal struggle between civilization and its discontents. Stoker died thinking he was a failure, but he didn't just write a vampire story, he wrote a manual for how evil hides in plain sight, how charm masks danger, and how the monsters that scare us most are the ones we invite in. In 2025, when we're more connected and more vulnerable than ever, maybe we need Dracula's warning more than the Victorians ever did. The theatre manager who pawned his wife's jewelry created something immortal, a reminder that the deadliest predators are always the ones who make us want to let them in. Thanks for watching this exploration of Bram Stoker's masterpiece. If you enjoyed diving deep into the stories behind the world's most influential books, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest literary adventures. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and remember that the best stories are often the ones that refuse to stay buried.